Here to talk about dealing with pending compliance issues for businesses, we invited Attorney Luigi De La Paz of De La Paz Castillo, Ilias Herrera and Company. Attorney Luigi, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Arden. Thank you also, Chris, for making the introduction. I'll be sharing a few slides just to guide us during this brief talk. My talk will be entitled Compliance, Dotting the I's and Crossing the T's. As we know, this is a phrase that's commonly used when mentioning being thorough, being diligent. It's normally used to describe a situation where you're making sure that everything is done. And I feel that in the same way, compliance is quite similar to this, but actually quite more than just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So as we know, and as Chris so well put it very well, compliance is ensuring that internal and external rules and regulations are followed within the company. No, essentially, compliance deals with what's required by the company, internal policies, which we will discuss in a bit, and external rules and regulations, such as those required by regulators if you're located in a PEZA zone or by the BIR, the SEC, or any other agencies or government departments that your company falls under or your line of business is controlled by. So when I say it's more than just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, tendency is that over the years we have had this impression that, oh, you're in compliance. You just look at the checklist and then you just go, okay, item number one done, number two done, number three done. But it's actually a lot more than that. As we learn right now, it's about preparation. It's about knowing what will happen next, and it's about creating a company culture that will definitely help in the growth of your business over the years. Now, compliance, as we mentioned, from an internal perspective, is making sure that all company policies are followed. It can mean, for example, when you file for leave, most companies that we have worked with, you can't just not show up for work. Kailangan ninyo magpaalam. Boss, even if it's only a text message, even if it's a simple call or an internal memo, you have to let your employer know that you can't make it to work. And that is an example of where compliance comes in. Your leave can be approved or disapproved depending on whether you follow the procedure. Another example of an internal policy is on procurement. It would be really quite easy if we were simply to just pick up ball pens and ask for reimbursements or go anywhere and just say, oh, I need this flat screen TV and i-charge na lang natin sa company. You can imagine how happy all the employees would be if we could do that. Unfortunately, the goal is to help the company grow. And with the company growing, everyone else will benefit. Not exactly the other way around. Other issues on procurement that we have seen where certain employees have taken a lot of liberalities. I don't know if you believe it, but one employee that we had to deal with had taken enough pencils to give one pencil to every student in the Philippines. Napakarami pong pencil. Natanong ko nga when we interviewed the employee, do you plan on building a house made of pencils? Because that's how many pencils you took. And that's and, and that's just an example of poor compliance right there. I think some of the policymakers and compliance people on this webinar right now are shaking their heads and saying, dapat may procedure kasi yan eh. And exactly that's it. And that is the compliance from a internal perspective. From an expanded perspective in certain companies, it makes sure that there that these rules are followed with the goal of making sure government regulations are met. Why do we monitor down to the last paperclip or to the last pencil? It's because in certain cases, these are company assets that have to be accounted for. These are actually monitored by the government. Every little thing is an expense. You can't simply write it off and say, while it might seem quite minuscule, at the end of it all, as we mentioned earlier, an entire house full of pencils is a lot of money. And that is money that the company has lost. From an external perspective, compliance means making sure that the rules of regulators and the government are followed. It's a bit self-explanatory. I think we have all experienced this in our lives. Chris had a great example here of applying for a visa. Uh, and yes, there's a lot of paperwork that has been done to do that. In a more practical setting, example, as if you are a locator in a PESA zone, all the inventory in your office has to be all the equipment in your office has to be part of an inventory. Because you are part of a PESA zone, there are certain tax incentives that are made available to you. But if you don't comply, if you don't submit your inventory, or if you shift this equipment from one entity to another entity that is not PESA registered, then you will run into several compliance issues. Another example is offloading and aside from offloading of equipment would be offloading also of employees, onboarding and offloading your employees. In particular, again, PESA zones. One particular example we had was a multinational company that had been acquired by another Philippine entity. And while they were both PESA registered entities, because they were in different zones, there had to be a reclassification of the inventory and also the people. So, believe it or not, this was only 20 people. It was only a company of 20 people that were being acquired. But because it was such a compliance nightmare, since the primary company did not keep any listing of inventory, did not properly onboard their employees, did not register them with the regulators, it took us over 6 months to resolve the issue. We had to wait for certain contracts to expire. We had to wait for certain registration periods to lapse before we could re-register. So from that perspective, if you were looking at the continuity of business, had you complied with these requirements or these things earlier on, then it wouldn't have been a problem. So I hope that with this, we approach the next three steps, the points that we will be making from an understanding that compliance is present internally and externally. So the important importance of compliance is to ensure that proper procedures are met in your company. I see compliance as more than just company culture. No? It would be great if it matured and developed into tradition, into company culture, because that means you're doing the right thing. That is an indicator that your people understand the importance of compliance and practice compliance. Compliance is a company's way of making sure that risk is mitigated. It helps avoid waste, fraud, abuse, discrimination, or other practices that disrupt operations and put your company at risk. At this point, I'd like to cite an example. For those of you that are in the contact center industry, you know that there are so many things that go on. People get tired, and your team leaders also get exhausted citing all of these reports, doing all of them, and you wonder, is it worth it? Is it necessary? Well, in one particular case, it was very necessary indeed. Because of the diligence of the team leader, we were able to properly document how an employee had systematically been circumventing the system and uh, storing information that they were not supposed to have. We were also able to build a labor case against most of these employees because of proper documentation, because of compliance. We were also able to prevent abuses and discrimination against other employees. In one instance, it had become their team practice to uh, humiliate the team members who did not perform as well as the others. Now, these are things that we've all encountered, and it's okay. We understand that everyone has their own management style, but there's also compliance, and there's a way that you want your company to be run. So, compliance in relation to compliance in legal cases, compliance is very crucial for us lawyers, especially when we're building your case. In some instances, even if the company is in the right, even if the company should not have lost the case, they lose the case because of lack of evidence. We have no documentation. We have nothing to prove that an employee had been systematically stealing from the company. We couldn't show any of that. Instead, our client had lost an illegal dismissal case because we had no such documentation. And on abusive and corrupt employees, as I mentioned earlier, if you find a house made of several pencils, then you probably know the employee that I'm talking about. Uh, and finally, it improves company processes and company value. After all, nobody would like to invest in, to be part of, or to purchase a company where everyone is corrupt or abusive. Another importance of compliance is that it ensures the continuity of business. For those of you that are doing their own business, maybe as a sole proprietor or as a partnership or as a corporation, submissions and other reportorial filings are a normal part of everyday business. Every year, every quarter, we're expected to file our tax returns. Every year, expected to submit audited financial statements, general information sheets, and the like. I understand for other businesses, there are submissions to, let's say, DOH, LTO, and various other government agencies. Uh, for instance, CRIF DNB regularly files with the National Privacy Commission their reports and their compliance. And so, because we deal with it every day, we also understand that not giving the government what they require or what they ask for is never a good thing. I used to joke with my friends, di bale na lang magalit sa akin ng misis ko, wag na lang magalit sa akin ng gobyerno. Dahil sa gobyerno, hindi ko matatakbuhan yan. Hahabulin at hahabulin ako. At ang misis ko, mabait naman at mapagpatawad. So, with compliance, there's no such thing as, oh, it's okay, don't submit it this time. Precisely because we're dealing with whether you complied or not. It's not an issue of, nabigay mo ba? Next week po. Hindi mo nabigay. It's either yes or no. There is no yes but or maybe. There is only a yes or no when it comes to submissions or compliance. Now, one example of compliance gone bad and in submissions, and this one had cost the company billions of valuation in one day. I think we're all familiar with the example of what recently happened to Mega World not a few weeks ago, and as just solely based on the newspaper articles and not based on any insider information or anything that we know, that was something that compliance could have done something about. Clearly, there was a disconnect there. The BIR understood it this way, while Mega World internally understood it this way. For the compliance heads on this call, you can already see the process of how that could have been averted. Clearly it was somebody who did not want to file something, or someone omitted a filing of something to the proper government authority, giving that government authority the power to shut down for half a day, resulting in billions of pesos lost in share value. So as you can see, these regulators can shut you down, let's not say on a whim, let's say for cause. And compliance ensures that mitigates that risk. I can't say ensure, for there might be other reasons, but definitely it will mitigate that risk. So, as I mentioned here, compliance ensures that you are not probed, investigated, or shut down for failure to comply with any of these requirements. And finally, and perhaps this is the fun part, compliance as a means of growing. As I mentioned in the previous slides, if you're looking to invest in, to be part of as an employee, or to even get funding, Series A loans, or listing in the stock exchange, compliance is very crucial. For those who have much larger ambitions than being just a mom and pop store or an Aling Lusing's Carinderia, but want to be a global brand, national brand, even a regional brand, compliance is extremely important. Putting everything together, first, good company practices. Second, it ensures that you are okay with all the regulatory agencies, meaning that they can't shut you down. And finally, it helps people who want to fund your company or be part of your company see and understand in very clear terms what the company is about. It's about transparency. When you're trying to invest in a company, when you're trying to find out more about the company, it should really be as easy as going to VIA and asking CRIF DNB to issue one of their reports, and you can look at it and say, you know what, this company is in good health. Okay, I'm okay to deal with them. I'm okay to invest with them. If you want to list in the Philippine Stock Exchange, you will need a lot of these records, books of accounts, files, and other submissions and documents showing that you have been compliant for a minimum of 3 years. Now, if you had no compliance to begin with, that wouldn't even be a possibility. If you want to do funding before you submit to the SEC, you need to submit several documents. Compliance is the key to this. If you want to borrow from financial institutions, you certainly have to show them audited financial statements, records, and all other things to show that your cash flow is legitimate, it's reliable, it's not a result of just one person lending money. Compliance does that. That is a crucial part of compliance because all of these things require a certain level of documentation. Going back to the visa analogy of Chris, certainly, kung mag-a-apply ka ng visa, kailangan natin ng uh, proof of funds, di ba? So, before we before we wrap it up, compliance can be seen as a best practices approach to running a business. Personally, when we handle cases, when we handle any new project in the law office, I we like to develop a checklist, especially for new matters, because it helps us when we deal with similar cases, such as, let's say, if you file a case for ejectment or for collection, we have a checklist of what are the items that we need? If you're dealing with a corporation, meron na ba tayong secretary certificate? If you're dealing with an individual, do we have an SPA? Very basic things that might sometimes be too basic that they are so easily overlooked or taken for granted. And so that's why compliance as a best practices approach can enhance, can create this habit, this tradition of how to run a business smoothly and to ensure that everything goes well. And as we said, a compliant company is not merely substantially compliant. It is either completely compliant or it is not compliant at all. There is no in between or gray area in compliance. It's either you are compliant or not. As we said, we have checklists. You cannot have 6 out of 10 and the auditor will say, you know what, that's okay. You tried your best. 60%, okay, pasang-awa ka na. Nope, it's either pass or fail. It's either you have it or you don't. That's why a a truly compliant company doesn't have those gray areas. And when Miss Mary will be discussing the red list later, there's a reason why that's a red list. There is no, and I say this in the most apolitical way possible. There's no pink list. No, walang fuchsia list, walang almost red list, or it's either you're in the red list or not. And it's the same with compliance. And finally, taking the little steps in ensuring compliance protects the company, increases its value, and improves its performance. And I think that's my time. But if you have any more questions, feel free to contact us. We are on Facebook and we have a website, or you can get our details through any of the organizers of this event. And we will also be answering your questions.